IVM.
Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Siddharth Bhatia. The show Bombay Begums released on Netflix early last month and immediately became a talking point, mainly for its portrayal of the women characters. From a bank CEO who has to face multiple challenges both on the professional and personal front, to a young bank executive balancing the needs of her career and a husband who is a barrier to her growth, to a sex worker with bigger ambitions and a young teen's troubled entry into adulthood. All these were widely discussed in the mainstream and on social media. But while it was attracting both admiration and criticism for its bold portrayal of women today, the state got into the act. The National Commission for Protection of Child Rights sent a notice to Netflix to stop airing the show for what it called inappropriate portrayal of children. So far, Netflix has not taken down the series, and its team, along with director Alankrita Srivastav and actor Pooja Bhatt, met the members of the commission to explain their point of view. Today's guest on our podcast is Pooja Bhatt, the feisty actor, model and award-winning filmmaker who is making a comeback of sorts with Bombay Begum. 21 years, I understand. We'll ask her about it. Pooja, welcome to the Wire Talks.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. Thank you for having me.
You were missing from the screen for what, 20, 21 years? And I believe last year you were a photograph on the wall in Sadak 2.
Yes, indeed. I was a photograph on the wall, something that we'll all become someday. And the 21 long years I've been away from actually being in front of the camera, though I have been busy making films, directing them, producing them, launching talent like John Abraham, Sunny Leone, a lot of other people, and had my hands full in many ways, but I'd actually forgotten the actor in me. I'd buried that part of me. And it was Alankrita who came to me with Bombay Begums, and Netflix, and she and Endemol saw something in me that I think I'd stopped seeing in myself. And the spark was ignited. And I said yes to the show and to play Rani, and the rest is history. I think it's fair to say spring has arrived in my backyard in more ways than one.
Yes, but in these 20, 21 years, of course, you were directing. But when you finally went on set as an actor after such a long time, couple of points here, couple of questions. What is the changes you found in terms of the way filming was done and stories were written? And what are the big changes you found in the audiences?
Well, being back on set, for me, when I decided to do this show, I told myself and I told my director very categorically that, when I come to you, I'm coming to you as an actor who's surrendering to you completely. I'm not going to come kind of, with my supposed garnered knowledge of filmmaking, because I think it would be completely unfair to be able to saturate the air with that. And I said, I'm, your chunk of clay, and you can do whatever the hell you need to do with me in that sense. So the process is familiar to me because I've actively been making films. But I was very aware of the fact that there's a whole new audience out there today who might not know me. They might know me as in the sense that they know the name Pooja Bhatt because it's a name affiliated with the Bhatt family. I'm Alia Bhatt's sister and I'm Mahesh Bhatt's daughter, but they might not be aware of my work because they possibly weren't born then when Dil Hai Kimantani and Sadak and those films were released. But I knew that one can't rest on past laurel, Siddharth. I'm not the kind of person who looks back in that sense and, rewatches my films. And I don't live in the past. Nostalgia is a lane that I don't really visit too often in that sense. So I was very aware of that, but I was also aware that there was a whole audience out there who had literally kind of grown up with me, who had kind of, held their girlfriend's hand for the first time when they were watching Dil Hai Kimantani, and their teenage kind of memories and hormones were tied to my youth. And they were people who possibly would not be comfortable with the passage of time being revealed on my face or my body, because when you look at your childhood crushes and your icons kind of age, somewhere your memories age. And we live in a world which is so obsessed with perfection, which is constantly trying to tell you that, we'll give you something to stop aging and fill your face with Botox, or, you should just look the same as you were when you were 19. So I said, no, those people might be a bit disappointed, But then I guess that was what was so challenging about this role, is to come back playing 49 unashamedly, dealing with issues like menopause, allowing the bags under my eyes to show, allowing the thickening of the waist to be visible and not try to cover it up and get paranoid trying to compete with a 30-year-old out there. And amazingly, the audience has responded to just that. And it shows you how much the audience has evolved. I mean, I've had messages from women telling me that, it's such a relief to see someone play their age as opposed to set some unrealistic standard that we know we can't achieve. So I think that's very vindicating.
So, what attracted you specifically to Bombay Begums? I mean, when the director came to you, when the producers, Endemol, came to you, what attracted you to Bombay Begums? Was it the fact that this was clearly a role where you could sink your teeth into and also play your age, or something much more?
Well, frankly, when they first came to me, I was quite amazed that they'd even thought of me, but I was in the midst of a schedule for Sadak 2 where I was assisting my father. I was the associate director on that film. And for me, life came full circle because having been launched by him at 17, I had the opportunity to be able to kind of play that role to my father in that sense. So, every child has to tick boxes in their head. And that was my way of giving back. So I had to say thank you, but no thank you, because I couldn't let go of that commitment, even though my father said, please just go and do this. I mean, to hell with Sadak 2. And I said, no, I'm sorry. I can't. I have to finish what I start. But they came back 3 months later and they said, just meet with Alankrita. And I said, I'd love to, because I'd seen Lipstick and I'd loved it. And on the surface, the title grabbed me. The world of finance and banking, quite new to me. But what I loved was it was a story of these 5 women. And, it kind of really, truly navigated their inner landscape and their inner world more than the external world that was created. So when I met Alankrita and we chatted about the show and my character in particular, I think what resonated was the fact that we were talking about things that people shy away from. We don't discuss things like menopause. We don't talk about the changes that, a prepubescent kind of goes through mentally, emotionally. We don't talk about the impact that a miscarriage has on a woman. And what she said to me, Alankrita, resonated. And she said, I believe that women are not really given agency over their bodies. I mean, we have to fight so hard to make our own decisions, our own sexual choices, our own choices with regards to whether we want to kind of embrace motherhood or not. And I thought that it was important to be part of a body of work that was kind of tackling all of these subjects and yet not screaming about them in that sense. So it was a no-brainer, frankly, And I said, there are no second acts in this business, Siddharth. It's very rare. And here was a chance to be able to kind of, play a part that was kind of somewhere tailor-made for me. So it would have been rather foolish to say no.
This point has been made all over the world. Meryl Streep has said it. In India, many people have said it, that the male star at 50 gets a chance to romance a young girl, and the girls get younger and younger. But a female star, a big star, who's won several awards, is got a lot of work to her credit, is stuck with playing, in India for sure, immediately, the fond mother.
Absolutely.
Little more. I mean, she's basically in the background in any scene. So really, in that sense, you get to play a real woman who's going through real issues.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that after a certain age, the world presumes that you have no sexual drive. Desire is not something that you're meant to embrace. You're not meant to be looked upon like that. You're not meant to project yourself like that. Oh, act your age, behave your age. How often has a woman heard that in her life? While we're very comfortable, even in society, to see a younger woman on an older man's arm, we get very uncomfortable with an older woman who is in charge of her destiny, possibly taking on a younger lover or getting married to somebody who's much younger than her. It's not accepted. And there are plenty of barbs that are thrown when that is done. So I think here was the part that, not only is she on top of her game with regards to her profession, she is kind of also balancing her family and her professional life. But she's somebody, whether she's hitting menopause and whether she's in denial about it, she is unashamedly going out there and getting her fill from life sexually. And I think that is what makes this character so complete and so complex, because in the film industry, this obsession with youth comes from the fact that they believe that the youth is a market that they can kind of rely on, which is why you want your stories to cater to younger people and you want younger people to be able to be enacting those roles. And you watch certain films where great truths are spoken from very young bodies and mouths. And it doesn't seem like those bodies have lived those truths. And now when you have platforms like Netflix who kind of make a House of Cards with a Robin Wright, where people had written her off at one point saying that, her greatest claim to fame was that she was married to Sean Penn. And she comes back in House of Cards and you're like, oh my God, where have you been all my life? So I think that they've raised the bar in that sense. It's not only about young people and young stories. It is a multitude of women in different phases of their life, and they just embrace and celebrate all those different stories. So I think that is quite magical. So I think it's, for once I'm not ahead of my times. I think I'm right. I've got the bus at the right time this time.
So Rani, the character you play, is a CEO of a bank, a woman at the top of a profession, but functioning, really speaking, in a man's world. I mean, the viewer, I sense that the suits on your bank's board are terribly patronizing.
Yeah.
Even somewhat suspicious and skeptical of your skill. Is this a common experience in the corporate sector, you think, or did you speak to any CEOs?
Well, I mean, you don't have to look very far from the film industry. When I started producing at 25, I made a film called Tamanna that dealt with female infanticide. And I was told that you have no business being a producer. You have youth on your side, just continue to act. What is this production nonsense? And that kind of was like, fuel to me. And I did Dushman then with Kajol. It kind of won her an award. It won Tanuja Chandra, who I launched as a director, an award. I did Zakham. I won my second national award. They said, okay, she's making movies, but wo art film banati hai. And then I made a film called Jism that just kind of smashed all the box office records in that sense. And then they kind of said, okay, now she's here to stay, but still very patronizing in the sense of, you're very emotional, or you take things too personally, or you're too passionate. This kind of constant assault on your femininity in that sense, where you're written off as being overtly emotional, or you're looked upon as somebody who's possibly having a bad day because you might be PMSing. These are realities. It doesn't happen with the crew, but it happens with the people who are finally giving you the money, and they're finally kind of, controlling your destiny in that sense. And unfortunately, half of them are not even filmmakers. They're just people with a lot of money who then would like to believe they're filmmakers. They have no idea what the reality is on the ground. And they kind of plan the future by maps written for the past. So I think that what Bombay Begums has taught me, and especially with the audience's reaction to it, is that the world has changed, of course, thanks to the internet and COVID. And the audience wants people to speak a different language to them. The film industry needs to catch up with that, because we're still kind of, talking in a language that's a little outdated. Our ideas of what women should have and should not have and how they should behave need to be kind of overhauled in many ways. And I think that the fact that it would take you so long earlier to get one film of yours released and get to every corner of this country, which is massive. And now you have a show that's out on Netflix and it's in 190 countries in a matter of an hour. So it's just a tectonic shift in that sense. And I think that Bombay Begums talks to the future. Arth was a film that my father made in 83. That spoke to the future. And he was told by the film industry then that what kind of an ending is this? Shabana Azmi walks away from the lover also. If she's not with her husband, at least she should be with the lover. I'm not sure that people are very comfortable to see women walking on their own feet in films, on screen or off screen.
Basically, I remember seeing Arth then, and my recall is that it did phenomenally well, because again, there are people starved for good stories. And since then has become a cult film in some senses. It's always referred to, etc.
Absolutely.
And Bombay Begum, ahead of its time. I'll come to the OTT, Netflix and OTT platforms a little later. I just wanted to ask you, when you were reading the script, when you were filming the show, what did you think of the portrayal of the other female characters? Because while we may praise the intent, there has been some criticism that some of the things are a bit over the top and maybe even a bit preachy. What did you think?
Well, I didn't think so. I think that, at the end of the day, a body of work, I think the responsibility is not to be real. The responsibility is to be true. And I think Bombay Begums is true in that sense because it is Alankrita's vision. It is the way she looks at the world. She had imagined Rani many, many years ago. She knew why Lily is why she is what she is. She knew why Fatima does what she does. She knew why Aisha is what she is. And while it might be completely untrue for certain women, it's completely true to others. So my point is, who decides the narrative? The idea is, what is empowerment? Empowerment is being able to sing your own song. Now, you can't dictate to me what the pitch and the tone and tenor of that song needs to be. There are many women within every woman. And in Bombay Begums, you might identify with a trait of Rani's. You might not identify with a trait of hers. You might identify with a trait of Aisha's. You might not identify with something of Fatima's. So I think that's really where it is. And I think that at the end of the day, you can't make everybody happy no matter what you do. So I think that...
Sorry, may I?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just on that point, I was thinking that the 13-year-old who, experiments with casual sex, sniffs coke, this is a society which is forever in denial. And many of these young kids are in their room at this very moment in people's homes. And everyone pretends it's not my child. And says bad influence. And, that leads to all kinds of problems because you don't want to take them for counseling. And it's a spiral. You don't want to talk about it. It goes downhill. So identifying with this character is troubling for the average viewer and family, isn't it?
I traveled the length and breadth of this country with that film trying to get tax exemption so it could release at that point in a theater with ease. There were no multiplexes those days. I actually met a minister who told me that, what are you talking about female infanticide? वो हमारे देश में होता नहीं है. वो तो चीन में होता है. And I was so disheartened. I said, here I am at the age of 25. I put my own money into a film, which is a true story, which deals with this issue. And I have a minister telling me, कि ये होता नहीं है. But then I realized that for every one person who lives in denial, there are 5 more who don't live in denial. So as far as Shai's character is concerned, she does not indulge in any iota of sex, casual or otherwise. She's somebody who is going through a tremendous amount of upheaval in that sense because her body is undergoing changes. She's curious about sex. She's feeling the first pangs of love and attraction. She can't wait for her period to arrive because in her head, she thinks it's some sign of growing up and it might make her more attractive to the opposite sex. Yes, she goes to a party with extremely self-low esteem where she dresses up like something that she's completely not because she sees some silly influencer saying that, women should look a certain way or wear a certain thing. And she goes there. She gets completely rejected by the boy who she has got this kind of crush on. And she does the most foolish thing in the world. She goes out there and tries to, drown her sorrow, or rather kind of just blot it out by trying to appear cool and experimenting with drugs. And then what is the consequence of that action? She almost dies of an overdose. Now, if that is not indication that drugs are not cool, and if you're going to experiment wildly with drugs, you might end up dead, then I really don't know what is. It's not like she snorts a line of meow meow or cocaine or whatever she's supposed to be doing at that party and breaks into a song, or she suddenly develops some superpower where she's flying through the air, where we are saying, oh, it's cool to have drugs because then, you know what, you can actually dance like Alia Bhatt, or you can actually fly through the air like Wonder Woman. The girl ends up in a toilet almost dead. The first line of mine in the scene after is me screeching at that boy's father and saying, what the hell were drugs doing at a 14-year-old's party to begin with? And then he answers with the most heartbreaking truth, which is, we were not there. And that is something that most parents in this country need to face up to, that they are not there when their kids need some sort of direction. They are not there when their kids are confused and have questions about puberty or about loss or about love or about painful things. They relegate their children to nannies. They relegate their children to drivers. They want to look away from truth by kind of planting iPads and fancy phones in their and designer clothes in their hands, because they just don't want to face up to the fact that their kids are growing up, or they possibly don't have the time or the inclination to. And then there are those kids who are on the streets of any city in this country, those young little rag pickers who are heroin addicts. But does society care about them? They don't, because they are invisible, because they don't matter, right? So my point is that I read the most horrifying story of just after New Year's Eve in Bandra, where I live. At a young teenage party, a girl got killed by her supposed boyfriend and her best friend. And they were all under the influence of alcohol or some sort of substance. Now, are you telling me that this is not happening? Are you telling me that a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old has not experimented with any sort of drug? The world has changed. You know, when I was 13, it was a really big deal to kind of try to drink vodka and orange juice. That was the ultimate that you could think of. Now a child will laugh at you in your face. I mean, have they spoken to the average 13-year-old or 14-year-old? There was a book I came across called Stoned, Shamed and Depressed. I mean, Bombay Begums does not even scrape the tip of the iceberg. The youth, majority of it, especially in well-heeled circles, is pretty lost within their own homes. And that is an uncomfortable truth.
That's exactly the point that the National Commission for Child Rights picked up by saying, and this also the result of two tweets that tagged the commission, saying that how can we allow this? And they said, take it down right away. Now, Netflix has at least stood by the series. But what happened when you got this notice? What was the internal thinking?
Well, frankly, and I truly believe this, I think that, you know, even if there's two people on Twitter who might have made an objection, and if the commission has acted on that, well, it means they're an active commission. That's their duty, to act on a complaint. And when this conversation was held with the commission and they kind of expressed their concern about glorification of a child doing drugs, I think that what was explained to them, and I did so personally, that it is important to understand the intent of the filmmaker and understand the reaction to that action of that character. First of all, it's a work of fiction. Secondly, disclaimers are very categorically stating that it's for an audience that's above the age of 18. And there is a certain degree of drug usage, profanity, sex, or underage, teenage drug usage, to be precise. But having said that, their concern was, and a logical one, you might be pitching this to an 18-plus audience, but your character is 13. How come she is shown doing drugs? So they were explained, and they were told that the reason that we've shown that is because we show the consequences of that. She almost dies due to that action. The next scene in the hospital, she's talking about wanting to be dead. She tells her stepmother that I wish I was dead. And her morale and her self-esteem is an absolute low. At that time, my character chooses to kind of deal with her with compassion, deal with her from a place of love. Because I believe that, you know, you can't, if we had put a scene in there where we're just talking about the, you know, the ills of drug usage, kids don't listen. But when they see a child their age, somebody their age actually imbibing and then having an OD, that lesson stays with them longer. So I implored them to kind of understand the intent of the filmmaker. I implored them to not strangle voices that are new. I told them it was important to kind of somewhere look at the world of today with the maps of today and not the maps of yesterday. I also saluted them for acting on two complaints because that's their job and they're meant to do that. And it's our job to meet them halfway. Look, Siddharth, I refuse to see this as an us against them situation. I think it's important that we understand that institutions, commissions are comprised of people. People have their own understanding of life, their own biases, their own thought processes. You know, as filmmakers, as actors, as content makers, we need to meet each other halfway. Nothing is going to be achieved if all of us are just going to have a knee-jerk response and kind of, you know, live life where it's going to be, oh, it's my way or the highway in that sense. You know, I mean, I can't just talk about wanting to illuminate the road with my torch and not wanting anybody else's voice or anybody else's torch to be out there. It started off with saying, pull the show. And then they understood. And then finally they had an objection with the fact that she takes a drag of a cigarette in a particular scene. And they said, well, it's illegal for a 13-year-old to be taking a drag from a scene. So they were explained that in the actual shooting, there was not nicotine given to her. It was actually some kind of chamomile or whatever it might be rolled up and given to her. Because the child was monitored, her mother was on set. Netflix is a global company. They have standards globally about how they use and how they treat children who are underage, who are actually part of their shows. And I think after that, the commission wrote to the commissioner of police in Mumbai regarding that one particular scene. But that's where it is. And there has been no more talk of pulling the show off air or banning the show in that sense. A little late in the day for that now, given the fact that people have responded so strongly and I mean so beautifully to it.
You do know that in today's day and age, the objections can come on some bizarre. This seemed like something a genuine concern, but they can come on very, very bizarre complaints. For example, somebody is saying, "Oh, the name offends my religious sentiments." Somebody is saying, in another context, a comedian was arrested because someone complained that he would have made jokes about Hinduism. So now it's quite possible that some, CEOs association would say, look at her, this character, she does all kinds of compromises and she, that is not what women CEOs do. So have you attuned yourselves and Netflix attuned themselves to these kind of changing times?
Well, I think that, to begin with, I think that we're living in a time which is very turbulent. I think that we are very quick to outrage. No matter what you do, there's somebody somewhere who has a problem with it. But I repeat that intention is the greatest thing. And I think that eventually commissions, courts of law, powers that be, comprise people. And I think eventually, if your intent is clear, that is communicated. I mean, there could be a roadblock, but if you believe in what you've put out there and you stand up for what you have put out there, and your intention is not to provoke or be provocative and just to be able to garner eyeballs, you make something that is just going to shake things up, and that is communicated. And that's really the case with Bombay Begums. I mean, seemed to be a huge controversy about this. But like I said, we're living in times where truth is controversial. But as you can tell yourself, from then to now, it was 8th of March when the show released. We're sitting on the 1st of April today. And things have kind of come to its natural conclusion in many ways. So I would rather focus on all the love pouring in and focus on all the genuine praise. I mean, the fact that there are women sitting in Pakistan who are senior journalists having a discussion about, the fact that you can't look away from the fact that kids do experiment with drugs. And this is not a show that's glorifying it. It says it all. I mean, that's supposedly a far more regressive society, right? They should have had more problems with that. So I think that when you make something, you need to stand by it. I stand by the show. I stand by the character. I would never have 21 years later been part of a show which in any way glorified the usage of drugs, especially for a teenager. There's no way. For me, the most relevant scene in the film is post that, where finally she sits down and tells this young child that, you know what, don't compromise your life and don't risk your life for some silly boy. Risk your life for your art. And that could well have been my 49-year-old self talking to my 19-year-old self in that sense. And I think these are conversations that women need to have with their daughters, where we are just kind of groomed to believe that if a man does not kind of give us that position and that place in their life, our lives are pretty worthless. So I think Bombay Begums is saying so much more. And I think that it's kind of, focusing on so many more things which are so empowering. And if there are people who want to latch on to, oh, she had a crush on a boy called Imran. Oh, but you know what? How could she kind of go out there and experiment with a drug? Well, when a child has feeling extremely low self-esteem and is in a situation where older kids are kind of imbibing alcohol or drugs, there's a great chance they might imbibe as well because their self-esteem is really low at that point and because they feel almost suicidal. So what are we going to tackle? Is depression with the youth a mirage? Is kind of suicidal tendencies and suicide a mirage? I think that we need to kind of look at these things, especially post-COVID. You can't believe that everything is all hunky-dory out there because it's really not. There's so much of uncertainty. And we need to kind of tackle that with a certain degree of compassion. So I would just appeal to the powers that be within institutions and commissions to prevail upon lawmakers, not to strangulate voices which are clamoring to tell the stories through this new technology in this age of hyperconnectivity. I mean, we live in the most fascinating time of human history, the most terrifying, but the most fascinating time. And the only way we can thrive in it is to embrace the changes that have been thrust upon us rather than to attempt to suffocate each other. You know, I mean, intelligence has been traditionally viewed as the ability to think and learn. But I think the time has come to rethink, to unlearn, to relearn. So, is it tough? Yes, it's tough. Is it uncertain? Yes, it's uncertain. Life is fierce. Life is difficult. I mean, there's no life we can live without being subject to grief and to loss and to heartbreak and to uncertainty. But that's the very reason to not want to retreat from life. You know, we can't carry torches that illuminate only our view. We can't just say we're going to make enemies of life and of each other and we're going to hate what we can't understand and just keep the world and people who don't agree with us at bay and not engage with them. No, we have to do the opposite. We have to meet the other in their world. We need to understand what it is that they're finding so objectionable. And we need to sit down with them, have a dialogue with them with empathy and compassion. And I think your intent is then understood. And that was a long, long, long monologue I just gave you.
Yeah, this monologue had several points. I'm just going to toss one to you right away. It's not something that requires discussion, but I think, for somebody like me who's always out there writing, covering, etc., and somebody like you who's sitting quietly and observing the universe, we have come to understand that thinking about the other in terms of they have a point of view, I have a point of view, etc. The points you made are really allegorical because that's exactly what is not happening. And the other has now become a monster. And I'm afraid that tendency is growing much more. This is just my thoughts. You're welcome to add to it. But I do understand you're making a bigger point here.
No, you're right. But the point is that, listen, at the end of the day, it's what you choose to be. I mean, my point is that I am not going to play that game. I am not going to be dragged into that kind of arena where hate is a weapon that's going to be wielded. I mean, I don't look at the other person as the enemy. I don't. And does that make me a fool? Maybe. Does that make me a hopeful kind of optimist? Maybe. But I think at the end of the day, I mean, unfortunately, we are all in the same boat, in the same rocky kind of terrain, in the same, turbulent sea. And the only way we're going to make it through this is together. Either all of us makes it or none of us make it. And I am not going to sit here and allow fear to permeate my being. I am not going to allow fear to dictate my choices. I am going to do what I believe in completely. If there is a retaliation, if there is an objection, I will do my utmost to be able to make the other person understand my perspective, to understand my intent. And if it's not understood, and if they choose to be blind, then I will deal with the consequences of that.
You mentioned that you stand by Bombay Begums, a very forceful statement. Does Netflix too stand by it?
Well, it's still on air. Not only on air, it's trending. The point is that forget about Netflix standing by it. I think audiences seem to be standing by it because it remained at number 1 for the first 2 weeks. Yesterday, somebody sent me a screenshot saying it was number 5, even though there have been many new releases in the last week or so. It was trending in Pakistan at number 1. I mean, people are watching it in Germany. I'm getting calls from people in the Netherlands. I mean, there are women in Nigeria who are responding to it. People who don't really, consume Indian cinema in that sense. So the fact is, the audience seems to be standing by it. There are people who have reacted and said, oh, but isn't there more to life than menstruation and menopause and for women? And I'm like, what is there? So the thing is that, look, not everyone's going to like something and not everyone needs to like something. But my point is that there's no denying that there is a conversation that has begun. there is a conversation that is started around Netflix. And the fact is that what's completely besides all of these things that they're nitpicking about, what I find, it's not about me. I believe very strongly that the tribe has won. It's not an individual who's won. For me, when I look at my own life, where in traditional Indian cinema, the 49-year-old person who's not been on screen for 21 years get the chance and the opportunity to be able to play her age, revel in it, and be unashamedly kind of ambitious, manipulative, human, compassionate, sexual, all of these things that women are at that age. But yet we are told, diminish your light because the world does not want to see so much of it. So I'm just very grateful. I'm humbled and I'm grateful at the response that this show has garnered and generated. It's been a month almost that it's been out there. A traditional Hindi film would never have had this reach. And gratitude. Is all I feel. Just grace and gratitude, frankly.
So one of the great changes and radical changes, not even a slow transition that has happened, is that these OTT platforms, it's not only technological where you make something, it's shown within a few months, and then it's all over the world in an hour, is that they are ready to take bold risks. Which
yes.
Now, I was just thinking, suppose these 6 shows you condensed into a 2-hour-long film without songs.
Yeah.
I don't think that it would have made it past any production houses, board sitting there and saying, ye nahi chalega, wo nahi chalega, audiences won't react, etc. No film like this could have been made. So isn't that is a remarkable change that has happened?
Oh, absolutely. Why would I look beyond? I think that if assuming this script had come to me and Alankrita had brought it to me as a 2-hour film to produce, I would have tried to pitch this to the money men in Bollywood and I would have been laughed out of the room. They would have said, Pooja ji, aap kya banana cha rahe hain? Aap 49-year-old ke bare mein kahani banana chahte hain, jahan pe wo menopause ke bare mein baat kar rahi hai. Please, this is a time when we need to be making movies for young people with young people. So the fact that it's a series, it's 6 hours, you get to really kind of, journey with these people. You get to really know them intimately is why it has this impact. You take the same story and condense it into 2 hours. The same 5 women would not have had the impact, And I was just telling somebody the other day, I said, interestingly, when you look at the 5 women, Lily is a bar dancer. She's somebody who has been forced to kind of sell her body because the bars shut down, and that was the reality, as you know, of many bar dancers in this country, in Maharashtra especially. If Alankrita was trying to be provocative, couldn't she have shown her in a compromising situation or having sex with like 10 different customers? But that's not what the intent of the filmmaker was or the channel was. The issue was not about, okay, we've got so-and-so and we've got so-and-so, and it would be interesting to show them, having X amount of kind of kissing scenes or being intimate with men so many times. No, that was not the way it was. A love scene is there because it's meant to be there, because it kind of tells you about the heartland of that person. If not, it wouldn't be there. There's no skin show in that sense, even though one could have had skin show because Netflix permits that. So I think that it's an amazing time. It's an amazing platform. It's an amazing format where you have this story told in 6 hours and people are binge watching it and saying, oh my God, it's over so quickly. When is season 2? When is season 2? And that's like music to our ears, in that sense. And believe me, when we were shooting this, we just were all coming from a place where we felt that, wow, what a great opportunity to be able to work on a body of, a script like this, where we had genuine respect for each other as co-stars, and there was comfort and there was trust and meaty roles for all women. We didn't plan it like some masterpiece that we were making. That masterpiece complex didn't exist in any of our heads, which is possibly why it's resonating.
So is there a season 2?
Well, I mean, given the fact that it's still trending and given the fact that people across the globe are asking me this question that when is season 2 going to come out, I certainly hope that there will be. I have my fingers and my toes crossed. And I think it ends at a point where you certainly want to know, where will this go next? So I think that, yes, there should be a season 2. If I'm optimistic enough, Uh, and, I think there should be a season 2 for certain.
So, you mentioned that the advantages of these platforms, Netflix-like platforms, which then say that, okay, we approve your script. If it's there, this doesn't bother us. Just make sure that it speaks this kind of language to, a global audience if possible. But sex, nudity, cuss words, etc. And most importantly, subject matter, because there have been shows in which the contemporary reality of India has been shown in a brutal way, sometimes subtle, but mostly brutal way. And these are things that seem to have upset the government. And the government has said that it's time we brought these people under some kind of control. We don't know exactly where this will lead. It could be a censor certificate. It could be the moment some complaint is passed, take it down. That's precisely the success of platforms like this, and the fact that their reach is unbelievable, that the officialdom is getting interested in it. So are you, are the other channels a little concerned about that?
I don't think so, and I'm not, frankly. I'm really not. Not as an actor, not as a producer, not as a director. I mean, reforms, restrictions are not new to me. My father made a film called Manzile Aur Bhi Hai back in 1974. His first film was denied a certificate. I made my first film, when I was 25. Then I made Zakham, which a stalwart from our industry, who was the head of the censor board, refused to give it a certificate, saying that it'll incite violence, it'll incite riots. We then went to the tribunal. We took the film to Delhi, and it was finally an NDA government that gave Zakham best film on national integration. So, which is why I keep harping on intent. Eventually, there is nothing greater than the intent of the filmmaker and the intent of the film, and that gets communicated. So I feel that we're talking about reform. Look at a country like Iran. Iran has made the greatest cinema with having insane amount of restrictions. And somewhere I believe that while it's liberating to have no censors really on an OTT platform, I think that, no censorship finally reveals you for how brilliant and how mediocre you are also. There are some people who only rely on skin show. There's some people who only rely on the fact that there's a gali per second, which after a point starts grating your ears. So I feel that somewhere, if I talk for myself, and I can only speak for myself, I launched Sunny Leone in this country. This is a country that separated the fact that she was an adult entertainer in America and accepted her wholeheartedly as a Hindi film heroine in India. So India and India's audiences are very, very forward, very generous, very accommodating. That's not happened anywhere in the world. Even Hollywood, with all of their talk, has never permitted somebody from adult entertainment to actually come into the mainstream. They are bigger prudes in many, many ways. So I feel that, when they talk about, oh my God, reforms are going to strangle our creativity, and, why? Bombay Begums, there were two people who complained about a show. They nitpicked, actually. They wrote to the commission. The commission did their duty. They wrote to us. We went there. We gave them our response. But first, starting with pull the show off, it's come down to one scene. So there has been dialogue and there has been progress. The show is still on air. It's making larger points. The BBC is talking about the fact that, you have a 49-year-old spearheading a show called Bombay Begums, and, she's dealing with menopause, and why aren't we talking about it enough? So I think that the voices have kind of started resonating globally. Bombay Begums somewhere has touched this moving, changing stream globally. And that's why women across the globe are responding to it and the issues that it touches upon. Now, women's issues, women being in charge of their destinies, women wanting to kind of, take control of their bodies and their choices, that makes people uncomfortable globally, as we all know. Men want to be in charge of our destinies no matter where in the world we are. It's not unique to India. It happens everywhere. So I think that there's an undeniable shift. Netflix does something amazing. They allow female voices to be heard. Not only actors' voices, directors, writers, and women of all age groups. And I think that that time has come, I mean, earlier they would say that soaps were made for women. It was the housewife you were catering to. I would disagree. I think that eventually you had that kind of content on TV. It was not the housewives' minds and hearts you were catering to. You were catering to the advertisers who would put their products up for sale before those soaps went on. And that's why you started kind of becoming more and more aggressive in that sense. So I think that, the world has changed. We can either live in denial, and we can have the unique distinction of saying that we want to ban a show made by Indian women for Indian women, which the rest of the world is lapping up. Or we can just allow truth to enter our door, look at it squarely in the eye and not be fearful of it. Because people don't want truth because truth kind of somewhere frightens them. But eventually, honesty, the intention is not to harm the other person. The honesty, it is to actually free yourself from fear. So I think that also a very fascinating thing is that people across the world are fascinated with Indian women. How many stories of Indian, you had a Mashweta Devi who wrote the way she did when she did. I mean, that was one voice. I mean, I can't think of very many voices after that. So the thing is that people are now waking up globally to Indian women, to their heartland, to what drives them, to what turns them on, to what frightens them, to what kind of, activates them in many ways. And the world is fascinated. So it's an exciting time in more ways than one.
So I think you've done a lot of thinking over the past few years when you've been sort of in acting hibernation.
Well, I besides making movies, Siddharth, I spend time in rural Maharashtra. I deal with forest fires. I work with the Adivasis. I kind of right now deal with while I'm lapping up all the praise and the love that I'm getting from Bombay Begum. I have a 14-year-old dog who's in the twilight of his life. And, I'm actively and passionately engaged with life, with all its ups and downs. I don't want life to ever be just one key and one note and on one level. So I think that keeps me grounded and keeps me sane. And I'm a keen observer. I listen. I keep my heart open. I keep my ears open. But if my heart is not open, there's no point in my ears being open. So I think that, we need to listen to each other. We need to understand that it's the same things that kind of keep us up in the dark at night. The same fears we all have. Are we going to make it? How are we going to make it? Will the world be what it is? It's changed so much. So time is really, I know it's not a popular sentiment, but love will always endure. It might not be something that the world wants to hear, but compassion, kindness is more important. I mean, I think that it's more important to be kind than it is to be right. And if Bombay Begums is flawed in many ways, it's because life is flawed. We are all flawed. So don't look at a body and a work and say, oh my God, this has to be like, perfection. It's not about perfect people. It's about flawed people. It's about real women. And real women make mistakes. But the point is that when they pick themselves up from those mistakes, why does the world shudder so much? Why would you prefer to see us down flat on our faces is my question.
So this has been a wonderful talk with a real woman. My final question is, let us assume that Bombay Begums happens, but also let us assume that it could take a long time and you'll go back to it. But otherwise, what is Pooja Bhatt going to do over the next few years? Because are you then you're saying, how can I top this? Let me just go into hiding.
No. I mean, hiding. See, the thing is that, even when I used to direct and produce, people would say, but when you disappeared? I said, I'm making films. I'm launching actor. They're like, nahi yaar, bagar aapko acting karni chahiye. Because people feel that if you've retreated, into behind the lights or behind the camera, then you're kind of somewhere dead. But this is certainly a resurrection in many ways. Like I said, spring has arrived in my backyard and I'm reveling in it. And I had to gather the life experiences that I have in order to be able to play this part. If not, I wouldn't have been able to actually understand the nuances that was required. But it was not designed as some comeback, Siddharth. We have to be decorous enough to admit that life happens to us, Life just kind of whispers sometimes. It just tiptoes into our room. It doesn't arrive with a big bang in that sense. And then you got to respond to it. So I'm hoping there'll be a season 2. Because I'd love to continue this journey with these amazing co-stars of mine, with my director. I mean, it was really a brilliant experience. In the meanwhile, if something exciting comes my way, I would most certainly accept it readily. But if it doesn't, it doesn't. I think that I'd like to live like a river flows. You know what I mean? I mean, just carried by the surprise of its own unfolding in that sense. So I don't plan too much ahead. I don't think any of us can post-COVID. Just be open, be willing to not compromise your ideals, not compromise your integrity, and do stuff that you believe in. If it works, wonderful. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Such is life.
Okay, great life lesson there. But this was a really fascinating talk. I think, firstly, thank you very much for agreeing so quickly.
Not at all. Like I said, Denzel sent me a message saying that, I'm supposed to sell you. I said, Denzel, I don't need any sales talk in that sense. I'm an admirer of the work that you all do. And it's an honor for me, truly. It really is. Thank you for acknowledging Bombay Begums and my work and having this kind of in-depth conversation.
Yeah, but from our point of view, it is also very, very important because the fans all around the world, they must be wanting to know the inner motivations and contextualize the show. So I think we are going to get listeners.
Yeah, but I must add something. If I have to be totally honest, Siddharth, I think that besides making films and besides busying myself with life, I decided to kind of look at my demons in the eye about 4.5 years ago, where I realized that I had an issue with alcohol. And I accepted that to myself. And I decided to just kind of drop the bottle. I've been sober for 4.5 years. It's something that I speak loudly about because I feel that, addiction and substance abuse is something that, again, is a male mainstay in India. Women are not allowed to drink openly, forget about recover openly. And I think that if I hadn't done that, I don't think the universe would have been so kind to me, because I think that things happen to you when you're ready to actually accept them and do justice to them in that sense. And this manifestation, what's happening to me right now, I mean, it's all that it is a manifestation of that action. The consequences of taking charge of my life and my destiny and saying that there's no, and they lived happily ever after, but they can be, and she lived happily ever after. And that's the life I chose. Gave up on toxic relationships with men and the bottle, claimed my life for my own, engaged fully with the ordinary, and then the extraordinary just was thrust upon me by the universe. So, yeah, that's that.
So, as I was just saying, that now you've added something even more, more valuable about yourself. That the fans in Nigeria, Pakistan, and other countries, and I can see why it's resonating.
Yes.
The Netherlands, and I'm sure in places like Britain and Canada and the US.
Yes, I mean,
and Australia.
It's quite, all over the place, actually.
Yeah, so I think, we brought this also to them to say, hey, I'm watching this magnificent show. Who are these people? And now they know what's been going on. So thank you once more for joining us. And we'll return next week with another episode of the Wire Talks with hopefully a guest as fascinating as Pooja Bhatt. Thank you from Siddharth Bhatia.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You can check out this podcast and other interesting ones on the Wire website, the IVM podcast website, app, or wherever else that you get your podcasts. Goodbye from me, Siddharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks podcast team.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week, Sierra Tires and TheWholeTruthFoods.com. Thank you for your support. We did a bunch of cock and bulls this week. We had guests like Ayushi Amin and Puneet Mania for that. Besides that, Vasanti Hariprakash was on, as well as Jay Alani, a paranormal investigator. Really, really great week on Cyrus Says. Do check it out. Tune into This Round Is On Me for an episode recorded from Gulmarg featuring one of India's professional alpine skiers, Arif Khan, who's looking forward to representing India at the Beijing Olympics. On The Habit Coach, Ashton has a chat with Kunal Rajput, a popular fitness trainer who recently completed 7 rounds of his Unlock workout series. The reunified, simplified gang of Tony, Naren, Chuck, and Shrikant discussed NFTs on the latest episode. On The Millennial Athlete, Tanvi and Shlok looked back at all the England championships of the year so far and discussed the interesting highlights of the same. Also on Thale Harate, our Kannada podcast, Ganesh spoke to Archana Shyam of Antharanga Theatre in the latest episode. And on Kadai podcast, our Tamil show, Kavita Jiva shed light in another story about the bravery and excellence in the governance of the Pallava dynasty. And with that, let's get you back to your show.
Come learn and experience the ABCDs of being queer with me, Shunetro,
and me, Farhad,
on our show, Gay BCD.
The two of us take you through our stories and experiences of being gay men in the city of Mumbai and have candid
and sometimes downright scandalous
conversations about sexuality, gay culture, and everything in between.
Catch new episodes of Gay BCD every Tuesday on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get all your podcasts from.
Working Monday to Friday glued to your chair making you feel dull? Worry not. Get your 5-minute weekly dose of travel around the world with Postcards from Nowhere. Join me every Thursday as I explore the strange, obscure, and fascinating parts of the world and bring out facets of travel you may not have thought of before. You can find us on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you get your podcast from.